Iowa State didn't quite make the college football playoff, but they were this close. Could things have gone differently if they weren't, in the Big 12 or if they were, say, independent? We'll talk about it today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day and making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Obviously, be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Now, what are we talking about today? First things first, Iowa State college football playoff. Could they have made it if they were independent? You'll have to stick around to find out. Second segment, Iowa State versus Arizona State men's basketball, big game. Third segment, Iowa State versus UCF women's basketball, big game. We got to break all that down. But before we can get that far, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, so now that we are kind of into this whole thing, we're completely going. Let's just take a second here, okay? I can already see the comments from a mile away. Trust me. Let's just have some fun. It's a fun Friday, okay? Let's play some hypotheticals here. This question of could Iowa State have made the college football playoff if they were independent essentially stems from the squad show that came out yesterday. If you haven't seen it, you really should go watch it. It's actually awesome. Every part of it. Huge fan. But it got me thinking, right? So we were talking about the college football playoff and the national title game, which I understand is a little bit of old news, but it's January. And we talked about how obviously Ohio State wins that, but Notre Dame comes in second. They are independent. Could Notre Dame, join the Big 12? And then we're talking, hey, is it worth it for teams to go independent? Keep in mind, 50% of teams in the college football national championship game this year were independent. That's a pretty big number. Now, that got my mind thinking, of course. Is it worth it for teams to go independent? And that's not the topic of conversation for today's segment. It's about Iowa State at the end of the day. But I will say there are two sides to this coin. There's pros and cons to being in a conference, and there's pros and cons to being independent. Now, Iowa State, could they have made the playoffs and or won a national title this year if they were an independent team? I'll just get it out of the way and I'll say, I don't think so. I don't think that's how it's going to play out. But this is an interesting situation to kind of think about, right? Because Notre Dame, I mean, that's where we're starting. Okay. So what is it about to be in a conference? What's the pros of being in a conference? Well, obviously you make money off of everyone else in the conference as well. If you want to talk outside of football, but let's jump into the football side of things. You can work your way back into a conference championship. Okay. And obviously a conference championship is a great thing to get to play for. It was an amazing opportunity, not only for Iowa State, but for Arizona State this year as well. But you lose 2 games in a row. You're the Cyclones, and I'm thinking, geez, I don't know about this, man. I really don't think we're going to make the playoffs anymore. I'm not sure how this year is going to shape up. They end up turning it around, and they had a complete, very 100% real chance to make the playoff. They were winning in. Now, before we get too far, this is on top of my mind. I will say I am completely aware they were number 16 after their win over Kansas State. Okay, I understand that. So I'm not saying that if they – actually, we'll talk about that in a second. But it's just on top of my mind. The con to being in a conference, however, is you do have to play a conference championship game. And that's exactly where I was about to go with that previous ranking. Look at an SMU. SMU falls to Clemson in the ACC championship game. Real close game. But they were told that their positioning for the college football playoff wouldn't be affected by their conference championship game, and then they almost didn't make it. I mean, we were having very real conversation of is SMU in the college football playoffs after they lost to Clemson in the the ACC championship game, that conference championship game. You're not in that situation if you're Notre Dame. Did Notre Dame play a conference championship game this year? Not that I'm aware of. If they did, let me know. I'll go watch it. But you don't find yourself in that situation if you're an independent. Now, if you are an independent, let's kind of transfer our train of thought there. If you are an independent, you don't obviously have that opportunity to work your way into a conference championship game. You do have the luxury of not having the opportunity, I guess, to lose your conference championship game, but you are forced to essentially be a big enough name that you win against a bunch of nobodies and you're in the playoffs, right? You have enough network pull, you have enough prior history essentially to make it in without beating teams in a conference and then making a championship game, right? So Iowa State, who did we play? Well, Texas Tech was pretty solid this year. I know that their record didn't really show it, but Kansas State, you beat a ranked Kansas State. You beat at the time ranked Iowa. And then obviously the Pop-Tart Bowl is a separate thing because that was way after. And then you're in a conference championship game. So you have notable wins. Who did Notre Dame play this year? Did they play like Army? I know they played Northern Illinois. So it's very different. And that's the topic of conversation with the the independent people is there's only a few teams that really can pull this off. Like in Alabama. I mean, look at Alabama. If they had a 2-win season, I don't even know if the state of Alabama would exist. What happened when Iowa State had a 2-win season? Ames is still here, let alone the state of Iowa. So very different, right? I don't know if Iowa State could pull off being independent. If we had an undefeated season, we probably look like UCF did a few years ago. Not the same caliber, right? Alabama could be independent and lose 2 games, maybe even 3, and have a very real chance of still making the playoff. It's just different for all teams. That being said, I kind of gave away my point there. Do I think Iowa State could make it into the playoff if they were independent this year? My answer is no, solely because we would play a bunch of nobodies. I don't know exactly how that whole scheduling thing works. I know way more about conference scheduling, but I know we wouldn't be playing like the same schedule we are now. So it'd be a little bit easier, right? But there's no market here, unfortunately. I mean, if you're the committee, would you rather have an Iowa State or a Notre Dame? That's like, if it comes down to both of these 2 independent schools, who would you pick? Of course, you're going to take Notre Dame, and they'll make up some reason to make it justified, but they, of course, are going to go with that side of the coin. So could Iowa State have done it? No, I don't think so. But it is interesting to think about. Could we start to see maybe Alabama not want to play in a conference championship game, go independent? Now, that whole thing is so much deeper than just that. Okay, it's like you open the can of worms, but then you've actually opened a wormhole into an entirely different, infinitely long tube that contains every worm to have ever existed and that ever will exist. Like it's I can't even wrap my brain around that. So I couldn't tell you. I don't think the playoff is exactly how it's going to be forever. I know it'll change. And I don't even know what anything will look like in 5 years. So to say that Alabama will be independent because there are more pros to them being independent than being in the SEC is a ridiculous take. I don't know what'll happen. I just think it's something that's interesting to think about because we saw it with SMU, and a team like Alabama is going to have no shortage of money. If it's coming down to the money thing, it's just about strength of schedule. And Alabama's hypothetical win rate is insane. I don't know if they've ever lost one. So they could be outside the SEC and be undefeated in the SEC. Put it that way. Speaking of undefeated, Iowa State's hoping to go undefeated this weekend in basketball. Saturday is going to be a big, big day, so we got to break that down. Obviously, Iowa State versus Arizona State will come up first. We'll talk about that coming up right after this. Attending the NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's a memory I'll never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable memories with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for an upcoming playoff game, and it couldn't have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Iowa State taking on Arizona State this weekend in men's basketball. Going to be an absolute cinema of a game. Obviously, very excited for that. Iowa State 16-2, standing at second in the Big 12, taking on Arizona State, who's 11-7, 12th in the Big 12. Interestingly, the wrinkle kind of in this game is I guess Iowa State's not most recent, but Arizona State's most recent game and Iowa State's second most recent game, both being against West Virginia University. Iowa State falling to an unranked West Virginia, whereas Arizona State somehow topples over number 23 ranked West Virginia. West Virginia getting their obviously win over Iowa State was substantial for the Cyclones, and it felt like maybe this was West Virginia's Super Bowl. And then West Virginia, now ranked, at the time, goes and falls to, at the time, 1-5 in the conference, Arizona State. Now, that's a perfect segue. Let's talk a little bit about Arizona State's backstory. Lost to BYU to start conference play, win over Colorado, and then 4 straight losses to Kansas, Baylor, UCF, Cincinnati, and then winning over West Virginia to find themselves currently at 2-5, as I talked about, sitting at 12th in the Big 12. Obviously, a couple common opponents here. Obviously Colorado, Kansas, Baylor, UCF losing to all 3 of those teams. Colorado different. Kansas, Baylor, UCF losing to all 3 of those of note. But then you beat West Virginia. Right. So I am essentially equating this Arizona State team to similar to that of like the UCF we just faced. UCF gets beat by 50 to Kansas, and then essentially should have beat Houston, and then gets 108 put on them by Iowa State. So it's like, where do you put this UCF team? That's a good question. As for actual, statistics around this game, outside of the games that Arizona State has played thus far, I do have a few kind of statistics here team-wise, but we'll take a look at the point leaders first. BJ Freeman, the number 1 scorer on the year for the Arizona State Sun Devils, averaging 13.2. And then the next man up is going to be Jostin Sannon, guard, averaging 12.8. Now, interestingly enough about Sannon is that he has not hardly played since the new year. I've got his kind of profile thing up here. Played against BYU on New Year's Eve. Played a full 24 minutes in that one, and then hasn't really played since. Did play 18 minutes against Baylor, but only put up 5 points. Clearly limited in that game. And ultimately, what I believe this is an ankle, from what I have seen. And at this point, he is probable. I don't know. I've seen questionable, but I don't know exactly where he lies kind of on that spectrum. It's not the same as the NFL, right? So it's just kind of like a maybe. So second leading scorer may or may not be in for Arizona State. Then you kind of look at rebounding. Jaden Quaintance is going to be that number 1 rebounder at 8.8. And then Bashir Jaheed at 6.1. Assist leaders, Alston Mason at 3.5 there is your leader. Now, the main thing I want to talk about with this Arizona State team, there are 2 kind of positive points for Arizona State, and then one thing that I do think Iowa State can capitalize on. Number 1, Arizona State very good from beyond the arc, shooting 36% as a team. Unbelievable. That's 4th in the Big 12 and 64th in the country. Certainly something that Iowa State has to pay attention to. Obviously, the 4 straight threes against UCF that TJ had to call a timeout for, something that did happen. Did things get better after the timeout? Yes, they did. And so that's a good sign. And I don't doubt what Iowa State can do against the perimeter, but I would say if I had to pick, I would say we're better on the interior than on the exterior right now around the perimeter. So I would like to see how Iowa State handles that. And then you want to speak on the interior. Arizona State's interior defense has been very solid this year, especially in the, kind of the realm of blocks. They have a block rate of 13.7, which makes them top 30 in the nation. Now, am I concerned about this? Put it quite frankly, no. We have Keyshawn Gilbert, His ability to finish around the rim is simply second to none. Taman Lipsey's ability to finish kind of that and one type of plays. Joshua Jefferson's vision on the inside. Brandon Chatfield, I mean, I don't know, something about that guy. He just knows how to put the ball through the hoop. And then Curtis Jones just shoots it from 57,000 feet away. So I'm not too concerned about that. It obviously will make an appearance, I'm sure, in this game. I'm sure we won't walk away with 0 blocks, or Arizona State, I suppose, won't walk away with 0 blocks. But I do think, that's obviously something that Iowa State can work around, right? I'm not too concerned about that. But there are two statistics in which Arizona State, I think, does kind of have something there. They can kind of build off of that. Iowa State can certainly stop that. Okay, and TJ, best coach in the nation, Gotzelberger, is going to find a way. He is. I'm 100% certain. But it's just something that Arizona State can use to build. Now, however, on the other side of this coin, what can Iowa State kind of use looking at Arizona State's year so far, and where do they have a little bit of a leg up? Well, I'll say this. Arizona State having a leg up in blocking is kind of like a little bit of a half step, right? It's like stepping from hardwood onto carpet, in my opinion. You're a little bit taller, but it's nothing crazy. You're stepping it from barefoot into the shoes. If that's enough to get you on the ride at Adventureland, great. But might not be. This one, what we're looking at for Iowa State here, this is like going from sea level to playing in Denver, in my opinion. Do we need that big of an advantage? No. Is that slightly exaggerated? Potentially. But I do think this is huge. Arizona State turns over the ball on 19% of possessions, and that's an average of 13.4 a game. That puts them at second in the Big 12. I just think that's a number that certainly helps the Cyclones, especially when you consider, since Milan's absence, where has this team excelled in transition? I don't love that we're maybe potentially struggling in the half court, but we are certainly doing quite well when the ball is moving up and down the floor. I pulled up the West Virginia game for Arizona State here because it was one of their best games recently. And I was amazed watching kind of that game back to see how many turnovers Arizona State had. They had 15 turnovers, 11 of which were West Virginia steals. They did still win that game. So that doesn't mean, this doesn't mean that Arizona State will lose every game because they turn over the ball a lot. No. I mean, they're 2-5 in the conference. Not a great record, but they have 2 wins. And over West Virginia, who is very solid defensively. We talked about this. Now, that's kind of just, you kind of take all these grains of salt, right? Iowa State still needs to play well. This is still a Big 12 game on the road. This is still going to be a challenging environment. I do think Iowa State will come away with this win, especially, after seeing the turnover statistic, but we can't take any game for granted. I thought we'd come away with a win in West Virginia, and that didn't quite happen. I don't know how many more games we can drop here. We're going to have to start kind of firing off some wins here, and I have no doubt. I think this team is 100% in one of the best spots that they've been, pretty much aside from every game other than, I guess, the West Virginia game, really. Even after the Auburn loss, I thought this team was in a great spot. So I have no doubts, but it's something we have to go. Let's go. Bring the energy. So I'm excited to see what Iowa State is able to do at Arizona State, and then they'll follow up with a game, obviously, on Monday against Arizona. We'll talk about that more then. That being said, the women also play on Saturday, so we'll have to break down their game. However, it is not against Arizona State. They won't play the same opponent. They'll play UCF. So we'll talk about more about that coming up here in just a second. Iowa State women will be taking on UCF this weekend in an absolute pivotal game for the Cyclones. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This game, many people probably wouldn't tell you that it is absolutely pivotal for the Cyclones to win this game. I'm telling you otherwise. I do think that this is an absolute necessity of a win for the Cyclones. Now, let's take a look at the opponent, as we always do to start things off. Who are we facing? The University of Central Florida. Yes, the men did just face them at home in Hilton Coliseum. The women will look to do the same. What has this UCF team done on the women's side? On the year, they've gone 7-10. They are last in the Big 12 with a record of 0-7 in conference play. However, they have played some tough competition. I will admit that. Okay. They start off against a 12 TCU and then an 18 West Virginia, Arizona, Colorado, Cincinnati, and then a 10 TCU and a 24 Oklahoma State. Now, what's interesting here is a lot of these games, yeah, they started off against a tough 12 overall TCU. They lost that game by 40, right? Then they play, an Oklahoma State, and they lose that one by 14, right? Where it's interesting here. Oh, you want to talk about West Virginia? 22-point loss. TCU, the second time when they were ranked 10th, they only lost by 9. So another interesting kind of one here, as I talked about with Arizona State. Like, where are we? Any game, it's kind of like the NFL. Any given Sunday, right? Any given game. The Big 12 is a tough conference to play in, especially on the road. Now, luckily, we'll be taking on UCF at home. That is certainly a great deal here. But UCF, they only lost by 9 against TCU. And kind of looking at the top players for UCF here, you're going to see Caitlin Peterson, their main scorer, with 20.7 per game there. Hannah Gusters at 12.8, and then Emily Rodriguez going to be that third top scorer with 11.1. Their top rebounder currently is Akul Ackett at 7, and then Hannah Gusters with almost 7 at 6.8. Top assists is going to be Navia Brown at 2.9 and Caitlin Peterson at 2.1. Now, here's what's interesting about this UCF team. They kind of shoot the three pretty well as well. We mentioned that about the men in the Arizona State preview. And so I did look up the TCU game just because that was their closest to my knowledge. What do we got here? Yes, my math was correct. Actually, incorrect slightly by 1 point. They lost to Cincinnati by 8 or 6. So a little bit off. But either way, against the 10th ranked TCU, they lost by 9. So I decided to look at this one. And it felt like TCU was shooting a lot of threes. We'll talk more about TCU when Iowa State faced TCU. But they shot 41 threes, TCU did. That's wild. Wild. And they made 15 of them. So 36.6%, 15 of 41 was TCU. UCF only shot 12. They shot less than TCU made and still brought it within 9, but they shot 50%. Now, you've got to have a compelling force when you shoot 50% like that. That's right. Caitlin Peterson shot 4 of 5. She had 33 on the night, 7 of 11 from the line. So that's kind of my main concern with this UCF team. Caitlin Peterson. What can Iowa State do to slow her down? Obviously is going to be one of the biggest points here. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. And we will come back to their kind of what they're looking at as a whole for these next couple games and why this game is so important. But just as far as this game in particular, Audie Crooks, Addie Brown, Emily Ryan, and then you maybe throw in Sydney Harris, that 4-headed monster. I want to see, let's say 47 points out of the 4. I think if we could do that, we win this game. 100%. 100%. We can win it other ways as well. But I think we've talked so much about this. Well, we've talked about it many times, but we've used the analogy of the Nutella on bread once. We want to see, the Nutella spread from crust to crust. We want to see all of the points of contact on the toast covered in an ideal world, right? We want every bite to be better than the last, and you can't have a bite better than the last if you're biting into just pure bread compared to the last one having Nutella on it. The analogy there being Audie Crooks has 78 points, and next leading scorer is Addie Brown with a 3. So now that's exaggerated, but you get what I'm saying. I'd like to see this team splitting, 4 players at least 10 points and the top scorer being like 18, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Now that's a little bit hopeful, but it's certainly achievable. It's certainly, that's nothing crazy. So Audie Crooks averaging 22 right now, going to have some high games, going to have some low games. I think she had 13 against West Virginia is what I want to say. So less, but let's see, 16, 17. And then we see Addie Brown with another 15. I think that's how they win this game. They spread it out. Obviously, defense around the perimeter is an interesting one because you just can't give up open looks is essentially what I'm seeing. UCF will knock down the open ones, as will most. but it's not something that's going to be a huge point of emphasis, as they just don't shoot that many, or at least they didn't against TCU. They still shoot pretty solid on the year, over 30%, but it's not anything like, it's not my main concern. Obviously, it will help to have Emily Ryan back. As far as I know, at this time, Emily Ryan is back in the lineup. Obviously played in limited minutes, of course, but did play against BYU. And we've mentioned how important she is to the overall vibe of this team. She adds to the calmness on the court, kind of calms everyone's nerves, not so much just kind of frantic indecisiveness. Essentially, this team is a lot more level-headed when she's on the floor and she's running things. So is that maybe a slight concern for the future? Maybe, but that's something we're going to talk about in a few months. For now, we want her on the floor and running the show. So that will certainly help. And then Addie Brown and Sydney Harris chiming in with points there. I don't know what the starting lineup will be. I don't have any interior connections, whether Kelsey Jones will start or not. But either way, I think that they've figured out kind of how they can do both. And so I do think that's a positive. I do think this Iowa State team can beat UCF. I'm fairly confident in that. And that's going to be a big deal, because what have we talked about and we not really dove into yet? Excuse me, my nose is itching. Iowa State needing to win this game. All right. So you look at the year as a whole. Obviously, the loss to Utah, in my opinion, kind of the low point for this team. Needed to take a look in the mirror. They may have, they may not have, but either way, they figured it out. They get 2 wins on the road in the desert against Arizona State and Arizona, and then they win at home against Texas Tech, bit of an ugly win. Then you lose against West Virginia, who is a very good team, and you get the win over BYU. The dancing after the game in the BYU situation, certainly something. Seemed like maybe we could have done a few more practices on that whole dance and gotten everyone to buy in a little bit more. But at the end of the day, I'm glad that they're having fun and they're celebrating their wins. 23-point win over BYU, nothing to scoff at. But we have to keep it rolling now. We have to go, because guess what? You beat UCF in theory on Saturday. Then you've got 5 days off, and then you have Kansas State and TCU almost back-to-back. Right now, ranked 10 and 9. 2 very good basketball programs. One at home, one on the road. We're kind of getting towards the end of the year here. Not the end of the year yet. We still have to play Kansas State twice, but we're getting down there. Okay. And so this is in my opinion, a must-win game against UCF. We have to get this one so we can use it to rebound, and we have 5 days off, and we can take a look at a couple good games of tape. Emily Ryan will be back. How are we using this weapon again? Couple good practices, and then bang, we can go from there and take down number 10 and 9, and we'll find ourselves in a very, very good position. Just my opinion, why I think this game is so important. I do think they'll potentially, in my opinion, my guess, they will take down UCF. I think they'll get this win. But like I said against, in the men preview, it's still the Big 12. You never know what's going to happen. You have to bring your A game, and you have to play hard. I do think this women's team can do it. I guess only time will tell, though. Only time will be the determiner of who wins on Saturday at 4 p.m. Iowa State, UCF at Hilton Coliseum. That being said, really quick, I'd like to throw in here, didn't have a segment about it, but if you have not looked into the Beauty and the Beast, I believe is what it's called, tonight, Iowa State wrestling will be taking on Oklahoma, number 22 ranked Oklahoma, and the gymnasts, who are they? I can't remember who they're playing off the top of my head, but they're doing them both in Hilton. Really cool experience, really cool atmosphere. 9 straight years for the Cyclones. I do apologize for not remembering the gymnastics off the top of my head, but you can tell I have researched this. I potentially will be going as well. Be a very fun environment. So look into that if you haven't yet. I haven't seen anything like it before. Can't wait to witness it in person. That being said, until next time, Cyclone fans, enjoy the weekend. Have a fun Friday. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? I mean, come on, it's free. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.